So we must do two things, two great things together to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself.
Well, I want to talk now about the design of being. I know I said we were going to take soul, but you know, the order dictates, and it's a divine order. And I really want to talk to you now about the design of being before we go further into the subject. And let's see if we can get an overall sense of this framework that we've been working with. It's like an open secret, this beautiful framework that we have, this design of being. And you see that it is a universal framework. It's universal. It's one of the great wonders, I think, that we can be given a framework that shows us the place value of absolutely everything, as though it were the one great suprafield that includes all other fields. So it is that one great overarching framework for everything. There's nothing that lies outside of that, and it's a woven structure. Can you feel that as we've gone through mind and spirit, that it is as though we have a tapestry? We are weaving a tapestry. The categories are weaving a divine and spiritual tapestry. So it is a woven structure. And that structure records the movement of the dynamic of being, how being moves, how it operates, how it comes to all levels, to every level. And so it's multidimensional. Being is multidimensional, and what we see is absolutely intrinsic to reality. It cannot be changed. That's the way being is. And this framework, this design, encompasses everything. It encompasses really the infinite range between the one and the many. It's how the whole expresses itself in universal wholeness. So we see that there is a movement, a dynamic, as we said, which is a divinely deductive movement from the general to the specific, from the divine to the human, and from the absolute to the ever more relative, we might say. This is the range of our model or our design. And it's more or less showing us the range of fetterless mind, as the textbook says. That the textbook would speak about the range of fetterless mind, and we get the whole range, the full extent to which being expresses itself. This design is the design encompassing the infinite translatability of one infinite principle, coming to every detail in being. It's like a schematic, so to say, for the unfolding of the universe, from unity to multiplicity, giving us an all-embracing divine cosmology. There just isn't anything outside of that. And we've seen that the operational four are the four logical elements that define the process of being's own divine self-reference. How the divine, how the infinite one in its divinity, and you know that the divine is how the infinite comes to the human, how the infinite makes itself understandable to the human through the divine. So the four come in at the point of divine science, and they give us the four divinely logical elements that define the process of how God refers to himself, how he understands himself, and how further God being, that infinite one principle, will make itself understandable to every further level of consciousness, right to our own understanding. So the four, remember that the four are a means of divine self-referring now. The four show us how being refers to itself. It's a reflexive sense that we get in the four. So we've been seeing that as we take the specific issue and orientation of the seven synonymous terms and their ideas, and of how those seven come to us, how they express themselves, and how the Infinite One, as a sevenfold principle, expresses itself and translates itself to every conceivable level of consciousness and being, we see how the four begin to unfold that whole descent of consciousness. You can see that the calculus shows us the working of the Christ translation. It shows us that translatability. So that Christ translation comes into focus, especially at the point of absolute Christian Science and Christian Science. There is a descent from science itself, first of all, to divine science, so that we could perhaps refer to divine science, and actually we have in the past, as the Christ of science. It's the Christ of science, how science descends, how science comes to manifest itself as the divine science of being. And so it's the Christ of science itself, that science itself, the Infinite One, which in the ordinary understanding would mean that being was unfathomable and incalculable, because when you have a sense of the Infinite One, you have something that by definition cannot be fathomed and cannot be calculated. But because that Infinite One is infinite and includes its own infinite idea of itself, it includes its own calculus, its own means of understanding, its own means of being fathomable. It's its own self-calculation. And so being is able to calculate itself. And this then comes into expression in divine science and as divine science. So that we would see that the divine principle, the infinite principle of science itself, is a divine principle that is love. It is essentially love, to hold within itself its own means of understanding, of rendering itself understandable. This is only, this can only be so if that principle is essentially love. That's the highest, isn't it? That love sense. For the Infinite One to render itself understandable and calculable. So, principle, that infinite principle says, I give you my calculus. I show you how to calculate, and thus to understand absolutely everything. That makes it possible to understand everything at every further level. This is why really the infinite principle, when it becomes divine, is love, the divine principle love. And so this is, as we said, the Christ of science. Can you hear? Mm-hmm. The Christ of science. The descent, the translatability, the expression of science is divine science. we already have that translation, that expression, that from within the infinite one there is a calculus. And when you have a calculus or are able to calculate, then you see that that infinite one is not unfathomable and unknowable, but is completely knowable. So that divine descent goes on, and we will see and have seen that as the infinite one shows us its idea of itself, which is its calculus, it's the four. That's the divine idea. The divine idea is that fourfold calculus. And we reach a point of science in divine science, that fourth point of science, that shows us that there is then a further divine descent. Is everybody with me? That's pretty... It's a potent flow, isn't it? Potent. So there's a divine descent. We've seen that at the point of science, in divine science, where we have the divine self-understanding. You see, we reach that fourth point of science. Divine science is the Word, Christ, Christianity, science, and we said that the value, the place value there, that great point of intersection is bringing us to the climax of divine science as the divine self-understanding. And that divine self-understanding further includes within itself its own divine descent, which the Bible calls the Holy Ghost. That's what the Bible means by the Holy Ghost, that something is coming to us, something is descending. It's the fact that this divine principle, love, does come to every further level, that it is a calculus, it becomes a calculus for every further level of calculation, for every field of the problem of being. See, we have one great problem of being, and it is transformed and translated and seen in a unique way at every further level. So every field, whether we call that field absolute Christian Science or Christian Science or the A, the B, the C, the D of Christian Science, that these are fields that are concerned with the problem of being. And the divine principle love comes to every one of those fields, every one of those levels, and transforms its calculus form into a form that meets the need for that field. And so the Christ of science then becomes, in absolute Christian Science, the science of the Christ. Can you hear that? Becomes the science of the Christ. The Christ of science becomes the science of the Christ, the science of how the Christ science works. And you see, the Christ science is really Christian Science. So we get Christian Science in really two ways. First of all, in its absolute sense, it's the level of absolute Christian Science, and then further, the level of Christian Science. And these are the two aspects of the Christ science. The first having to do with what we can call positive problems, positive calculations that concern positive questions, that concern really the positive problems in being, and concerns therefore ideas, specific ideas. In other words, how ideas are brought forth, how to calculate specifically, how to calculate that infinite one in a unique, individual, specific way, how to calculate within the realm of the divine principle love and find a specific solution to a specific problem of being, because we know that we have many, many problems of being, and this all belongs to the realm, to the field, to the discipline of absolute Christian Science. So that would be absolute Christian Science, just a thumbnail sketch, a brief overview of the pedal note or the purpose or the intent or what is being dealt with on that level. And then when we come to the level of Christian Science, we have those laws and those orders on that level that enable us to deal not with positive problems, what we have been calling positive problems, but with what appears to us, to the human, to be negative problems. What we perceive to be negative problems. Now, being never says there are negative problems. Let's be clear about that. But they are perceived to be negative because there's something within our understanding that needs to be clarified, needs to be corrected, lined up, you see, with the understanding of the divine. And so our problems are perceived to be negative. And so that calculus, the calculus that comes in on the level of Christian Science, is breaking in a further descent, and it transforms itself, it adapts itself to dealing with that specific realm of application, and with dealing with the perception of a negative problem. That's what those four orders are: the order of the Word, the order of the Christ, the order of Christianity, and the order of science. Those are the four orders, and you see there that they are sequential orders. For the first time we get sequential orders. The Word, the Christ, and Christianity are clearly sequential orders, which means what? It means that they are adapted, these laws, which are sequential in their ordering, are adapted to our perception of time and space. They have to be adapted to the fact that we are working something out. It's called the mortal concept, the misconception of being. And so you can hear again that the love within the divine principle is to adapt itself specifically, perfectly, to the need, and so we get those laws that are a step-by-step ordering of the laws that lead us to the solution to every life problem on that level. Does that make any sense? Is that clear? Okay. Let's see. Yes, we said they're adapted to our perception of time and space, and to working that out practically. You see, working out the claims of time and space practically. The claim and the belief that we have of having to work something out in time or work something out in space, because it's a mortal perception, a perception not of the isness and the beingness of being, but of the becomingness of being. So because you have a sequential order, you have something that is becoming. You see, there's a becomingness going on. This seems to go on through time and space because of the mortal concept within us that we are working out. And so these orders equip us to work that out. They're working on us to enforce that we work that through completely. You see, those laws are working on us to ensure that we work out entirely the mortal proposition, the proposition that being could ever be of a mortal nature. Actually, I think I said that especially the first three orders are clearly sequential. But did you notice when you come to the fourth order, you see that there's some kind of a change going on in the presentation of the order. We call it the science order. It is the science order, and yet it looks quite different from those first three orders. And we find that the sequential sense is being transformed at that point. It's being transformed into a structure. So sequence is being transformed into structure. It's being transformed into the science order, which is the first indication of an ascending way of understanding. There is an indication that understanding is being transformed, understanding is being restructured, and that there is an ascent going on within consciousness, within understanding. And that we are moving away from the becomingness of being, from the sense of being becoming, and moving more and more into being itself with that fourth order. So we're on the way, the ascending way of understanding, and now we begin to realize that there is not only a descending way, there is an ascending way. As we've come down through the design of being, this was a descent. This was the descending way. When we touch the level of Christian Science, where we are now, we're talking about now, we see that the descent results in a lifting up, of consciousness. It works, it makes an impact on the level of Christian Science, on the human understanding, and that impact has the form of the movement of an ascent within consciousness. So there is an ascending way in that design, and we are on that ascending way of understanding. You know, we often speak of the descending way as the way of demonstration. We see how that infinite one principle has demonstrated itself right through, all the way through the levels, all the way to the level of Christian Science, and now demonstrates itself as bringing forth an ascent within the human understanding. And so the ascending way is the way of understanding. That we are on the way to that complete coincidence of our understanding with the divine self-understanding of itself. And the ascending way of our understanding begins with the word order. It begins with the word, the Christ, and Christianity on the level of Christian Science. And then when we come to the science order, we see that something is coming in, as we indicated, that we are already approximating being more and more. And the science order shows us that, begins to show us that actually what we have perceived to be a sequential word order, a sequential Christ order, and a sequential Christianity order is in fact being gathered up into an emerging understanding of beingness at the point of science. That's all going on at the point of science. At science, it's really the form of our consciousness that we're talking about, that the form of consciousness is changing, it's being structured, becoming structured, and so that which seemed to be a developing sense, an unfolding sense, is gathered up. The Word, the Christ, Christianity are gathered up into the standpoint of science, and the conscious understanding of beingness begins to emerge. So the science order gathers up the Word, and it says, you know, actually the essence of that Word is soul and life. So if you know from your study aid and your study of John Dorley's work, because that was one of his great contributions, to have not only realized that there were 4 orders, but to have discovered that 4th order, to have been able to see it and present it as the candlestick order. And looking at that structure of the candlestick order, we see that science says of the Word that instead of there being a sevenfold sequence, that the essence of that sequence of mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love, the essence of that is soul and life. So it gathers up the days of creation sense that we get in the word order, and it lifts it up to science as the word, namely as the numerals of infinity. That's why you often hear that the days of creation become the numerals of infinity. That's the great step at the point of the science order. And then the science order gathers up the essence of the Christ order. It looks back, you see, what did we say? That science always looks back on the Word, the Christ, and Christianity and gathers them up into the higher standpoint of being. So the science order looks back on the Christ order and gathers up the essence of the Christ order. And it says the essence of that is spirit and truth. So we have soul and life, and now spirit and truth. And this is what John Dorley would call the divine infinite calculus. The Christ order is really showing you something about the divine infinite calculus, whereas the word order is really showing you something about the numerals of infinity. It's just such a love sense, because how can we begin to know something about the numerals of infinity? Through the days of creation, you see. So the word order presents us with the days of creation sense so that we can then further be lifted up to the understanding of what the numerals of infinity are. And the Christ order shows us something about that translation from principle to mind, so that later we can be lifted up into the understanding of the divine infinite calculus. And then the science order at the point of Christianity gathers up the Christianity order in its essence and says the essential elements of that order are mind and love. And this is what John Dorley would call the fourth dimension of spirit. He got that terminology, borrowed that terminology really from Mary Baker Eddy, from Prose Works, and from Mrs. Eddy's reference to Christian Science as being the calculus, the divine infinite calculus, explaining the line, plane, space, and fourth dimension of spirit. So that fourth order of science is, as you can see, a structure. It's what John Dorley perceived as the candlestick structure, the candlestick order, where the central shaft is principle itself. So we have the Word, the Christ, and Christianity becoming, from the standpoint of science, the numerals of infinity, the divine infinite calculus, and the fourth dimension of spirit. So as a science order looks at itself now the science order, which has looked at the Word, looked at the Christ, looked at Christianity, and extracted and drawn forth the essence of those orders, now the science order looks at itself, turns back on itself, refers back to itself to see its own essence of itself. And it sees the three, those three, and sees that this is the one principle, that it is the one principle of those three. That's where principle comes in. It's a principle is the essence of those essences. Yeah. And so the structure of that order is the candlestick order, because the main shaft of that candlestick is principle, and that goes through everything. It runs right through everything. And you have three sets of branches then coming off of that main shaft. The first set of branches is soul and life, the Word. The second set is spirit and truth, the Christ. and the third set is mind and love, which is Christianity. And that's why we can say that the science order gathers up the sequential orders on the level of Christian Science into the beingness of them. It leads us into the beingness of them. Can you see that? Yeah. All right, so always remember what we have said now many, many times, and it begins to come home to us that whenever we reach the point of science in that calculus, that science will always gather up the Word, the Christ, and Christianity, and will look at them from the highest standpoint. And that highest standpoint is, for science, beingness, the beingness of it. So you hear that there is an ascending way, that in the calculus even there is an ascending way from the Word to the Christ to Christianity to science. And then science will have that ability to lift us further. Science, the point of science will always lift us to the further level, to the next higher level. And this is what we mean, that being is becoming, and it's becoming really being, isn't it? We're becoming what we are. So the science order is preparing us for the higher levels. It's taking us out of the time sense, and it consequently gathers up the calculus of Christian Science. Now, the calculus on the level of Christian Science is gathered up into one law, one order. It's the whole order and law of the calculus on the level of Christian Science. And we would see there that we have everything that we need, all the elements that we need to calculate with on that level and to answer all of the questions of being on that level. What is that? Again, those elements that we need. We need the numerals of infinity. We need the divine infinite calculus. We need that fourth dimension of spirit. So that science order is marvelous, and it's so simple. You know, when you start in the science of being and you hear about that science order, it seems to be so elusive, so difficult. I think it was many, many years before one really began to grasp, just speaking for myself individually, the science order. It was kind of the last holdout, the last bastion of holdout, that one just couldn't understand that order. And every time we would have a class on the science of being, it seemed like there would never be enough time to talk about the the science order. I think it was sort of something that one didn't want to touch insofar as teaching it, if I can, be that honest, that it was always that we had to come back the next time to get the science order. Yeah. And yet, the moment you touch that order and you understand that order, the simplicity of it is profound. It's absolutely profound. So it's marvelous in its simplicity, and it's so easy, if we can say easy, because it is that fact that the first three orders are gathered up into that simplicity. And that's what science will always do. It will always move towards simplicity, and in the science order, therefore, you see everything. Everything is there. You have your fundamental elements with which you're going to work. Those are the numerals of infinity. You can call them the ideas of the seven synonymous terms, or you can even call them the seven synonymous terms if you want to. That we need those basic elements, those basic numerals, with which then to calculate, see. So the word sense, science as the word says, first you need your values, your numerals, your basic elements. And then at the point of the Christ, you see that the science order would say, but how can you do anything with those basics, with those basic values and elements, be they ideas or synonymous terms, you need a divine infinite calculus. You need to be able to calculate with those values. And so the divine infinite calculus is the way those numerals are calculated. They are calculated through a fourfold calculus. And finally, you see that when you calculate, when you take your values and you calculate them, that the outcome, the result is infinite. There's no end to it. And that it takes something enormous to contain that. It takes something infinite to contain that infinite calculation that has been calculated by the divine infinite calculus. And that's what is meant by the fourth dimension of spirit. It takes the whole realm of spirit, the spiritual realm, to hold the calculation of those fundamental values. So you hear word Christ, Christianity, and finally we would see at the point of science that therefore numerals of infinity, the divine infinite calculus, and the fourth dimension, they can never be separated from each other. They can't stand alone. They must work together. They are inseparable. Inseparable as what? As one principle. So again, you see that the science aspect of the science order is that which gathers the Word, Christ, and Christianity aspects of the science order, gathers that right up into the fact that this is one principle that we're working with.